Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 890 for August 18th, 2021, with our Happy Hour live webcast conversation from last Friday night. Our guests were Brian Nation, the former Master Distiller at Ireland's Midleton Distillery. He's now at the new O'Shaughnessy Distilling Co in Minneapolis, Minnesota, making Keeper's Heart Whiskey, along with Ryan Maybee, the co-founder of Kansas City's Jay Rieger & Company Distillery. This is a big week for both of our guests. Rieger's put its first bottled-in Bond Rye on sale Monday, while O'Shaughnessy Distilling officially opens to visitors starting Thursday. As always, thanks to Redbreast and Dewar's, the presenting sponsors of Whiskey Cast, for making these live webcasts possible each week, along with our segment sponsors on the podcast each week, Oban, Writer's Tears, and Sangamore Spirit. Now, if you haven't listened to the podcast version of our Friday night webcasts before, we use a live streaming platform for the webcasts that emphasizes video quality over audio quality. And while we have cleaned up some of the background noise, there will still be occasional glitches from time to time. Otherwise, you'll hear things exactly as they happened the other night. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Happy Hour live webcast from whiskeycast.com. It's Friday the 13th. What could possibly go wrong over the next hour or so? We're about to find out as we start another one of our Happy Hour live webcasts. I'll be joined in just a few minutes by Brian Nation, who just finished moving over from Ireland to Minnesota, and he'll explain why in a minute. Hope you have had a good week. A lot of new whiskeys coming out this week. Was tasting some new make earlier today from Connacht Whiskey Company in Ireland. They have also just released their very first single malt whiskey today. You can find my tasting notes for it after the webcast is over at the WhiskeyCast website, and I'll have them on the show this weekend. We'll also be talking on the podcast this time around with Nick Morgan, who has just written a new book in conjunction with the Whiskey Exchange. Everything you wanted to know about whiskey, but was afraid to ask, and he punctures a lot of myths about whiskey. Nick and I talked earlier this week, and you'll hear that interview coming up on the podcast. Sunday night, Monday morning, depending on where you are in the world. Let's bring in our pal, Brian Nation, now at O'Shaughnessy Distillery in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, after years and years at Midleton in Ireland. How are you, Brian?
I'm very good, Mark. How are you?
You are breaking up just a little bit here, but we'll see if we can solve that. First of all, tell us why you moved from Midleton to Minnesota. Big change in climates there, at least in a few months.
Yeah, I was looking for cold weather. To be honest with you, it was something that wasn't on the cards for me. Initially, I would have thought that I would have stayed where I was because I was very happy where I was. But an opportunity arose when two cousins, Patrick O'Shaughnessy and Michael O'Shaughnessy, reached out to me and spoke to me about a project that they had in mind in relation to developing a distillery and a new brand of whiskey. And it really excited me from the start because getting the opportunity to be involved in developing a brand from the ground up and being part of a team that would put together a new distillery from the ground up, all of this excited me. And maybe it was a midlife crisis or something, I don't know. But after 23 years in Middleton and 23 great years in Middleton, I decided to make the move and take myself and my family across the water from Cork to Minneapolis in America. And we only really properly arrived here last Tuesday week, so we're still settling in. I've told the kids that it never gets cold here. So
you lied.
In January.
You lied.
I lied.
I've been to Minneapolis in January. It gets butt-numbing cold.
Exactly. But something for the kids as well is that they've never witnessed proper snow in their lifetime. So they're going to get a real treat in that. They might enjoy it for a few days anyway.
As Nurse Dave points out, I hear Minnesota is just like Ireland, except totally different.
Yeah, I'm beginning to see that, yeah.
Tell us about the distillery. We can see it behind you in the windows there through the bar. Looks like a beautiful place, brand new, built from the ground up, and you helped design this, right?
Absolutely. Basically, it's a distillery that has both pot distillation and column distillation. Our focus is going to be a lot around the innovation around the copper pot stills, using triple distillation and copper pot stills, and taking that Irish traditional method of whiskey making and applying it to American whiskey as well. And that's part of it that really excited me in relation to this type of a journey and this type of an adventure. So what we have the distillery that has a full brew house, fermentation, copper pot stills. Then we also have a continuous column, we have a vodka still, and we have a gin still. So we've got a lot of versatility within the distillery. And then we also have a nice hospitality area where we have both a main bar, mezzanine, potato bar area, which is real cocktail area. And we also have outside dining and outside space for enjoying some cocktails and drinks with friends.
Let's talk about the whiskey now. Keeper's Heart, your colleagues sent me a wee bottle of it. And as you've pointed out, this is a hellacious combination that we haven't seen very often with American Rye whiskey, Irish grain, and Irish pot still whiskey. Now, you know about the first two and have distilled those for years, but you hadn't really tried much with rye yet, have you?
Absolutely not. So this was a great learning experience for me as well. And I suppose back to that whole idea of being able to learn and develop through whiskey making and learning about the whole side of American whiskey making is something that has attracted me to this role as well. But one of the key things with this first release of the whiskey is we set ourselves a task of producing a fantastic quality whiskey that really showcased the best of Irish and American whiskey flavour styles and profiles, but also was a very versatile whiskey that would be able to be enjoyed drunk neat on the rocks as a highball or in cocktails. And so there was a good bit of effort put into this, a lot of effort put into this. When I came on the role, it was my first major project really, along with the design of the distillery and assisting with the design and installation of the distillery, was putting this whiskey together. So I had great fun in Ireland because at the time I couldn't get over to America because of COVID and all the travel restrictions. So it was I had no problem getting Irish whiskey, but getting the American whiskey over was a bit difficult. And that's another story. But effectively, I went through
We've got plenty of time if you want to go into it. Go ahead.
Basically, it's not that easy to get a American whiskey across into Ireland, so we had to be creative, let's just say, to get some samples across. But got them across, and then effectively putting the blend together was a very interesting and a very educational role for me, effectively. And, there was a number of different prototypes put together. I would say at the outset, looking at the different types that we were looking at, we probably started out with nearly 120 prototypes. And then it's whittling them all the way down to try and find the flavor profile that really fits what we were trying to achieve. And we were working with, Irish single pot still whiskey that has been matured for 4 years in refill American barrels, Irish grain whiskey that has been matured for 4 years in refill American barrels. And then we ended up with using rye whiskey as well that was matured for 4 years in virgin American oak. And what I found was that when you're putting, pot still and rye together, you've got two fairly flavoursome whiskies that can really compete against each other if they're not in the correct balance and if they're not in the correct proportions. And I found that bringing some grain whiskey into it actually allowed the whiskies to work well together. And the grain whiskey does show through in the overall blend itself as well. So we're really happy with what we ended up with. But actually putting the prototypes together, I had a number of palates in Ireland that were beginning to taste it and see what was working and what was not, and then was able to come over in January to America and get some American palates to taste the different prototypes. And that was the way we whittled down to the final one. And in April, we actually decided on the final prototype in Minneapolis, and that was a nice achievement. It was something very special for us as a team at OS Distilling and Keeper's Heart to really be able to say, this is our flavour, this is the Irish American whiskey that we want to bring forward to market. And to be honest with you, any person that has tasted it so far has been quite positive about the flavours and the versatility of the whiskey.
I mean, I like this a lot, and I'll post my tasting notes for it soon at the website. But I'm just curious, you said you had some folks in Ireland trying it, some different palates. What did you tell them when you said, how did you tell them you were going to blend Irish grain and single pot still whiskey with American rye and get away with it?
Let's just say there may have been some eyebrows raised. But at the same time, when people began to taste the different whiskies and began to taste the blends, and as I said, there was a number of different prototypes there, people began to see that it actually did work and that the flavour profiles were quite good, and that this whole overall offering as a whiskey was actually a very attractive and a very interesting offering. So, it didn't take long for people that tasted it to actually go, wow, I get it. I actually get that this whiskey does work, So once they tasted it, the eyebrows went back down a bit.
How much experience did you have distilling rye before, though?
Not a lot. I would have done some rye distillations back in Midleton. And we would have played around a little bit in the micro distillery, and we would have also played a little bit around in the main plant. But obviously these whiskies are sourced whiskies because we don't have any of our own whiskey from the distillery so far. So what we were looking for was when I was looking for the components was to have whiskies that actually had a good robust flavor profile, particularly from the pot still and the rye, that really delivered good flavor. So that when you brought both together and then introduced the grain whiskey as well, that you could get a very complex but balanced whiskey flavor.
We have a question for you from Nurse Dave. Wants to know what you think about the American guidelines for distilling spirits versus Ireland now that you're familiar with both.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, each of them have their own different intricacies and their own different limitations. I feel that coming to America here, we have an opportunity to do some more innovation around the pot stills, to be honest with you, and to try different styles of pot still distillation, and then obviously to be in compliance with the TTB. So, there are different limitations. I think, you have some flexibility in the Irish whiskey side and you have flexibility in the American whiskey side. And it really is up to me as a distiller and for all distillers to play within the guidelines to produce the best flavours of whiskey that they can possibly make.
Speaking of the TTB, how did you resolve that question of what to call it, since it's a blend of Irish and American whiskies? You can't call it Irish and you can't call it American, so what do you call it under the legal rules?
You actually call it whiskey because it's actually a blend of Irish and American. So the actual term whiskey is what it's actually called. So, we did have to go through a number of iterations there internally really to try and find out what was the correct by looking at the TTB. But once we went forward for the TTB application, we were confident that it would pass, and it did without any hesitation.
Well, as I noted earlier, it is Friday the 13th, or as a lot of folks like to refer to it in the rye whiskey world, Rye Day the 13th. And I want to bring in Ryan Maybee now from Kansas City's Jay Rieger and Company. They're releasing their first Kansas City distilled whiskey since Prohibition on Monday. The Jay Rieger and Company bottled in Bond Rye. Ryan, how are you guys today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. I had the chance to taste this today and really impressed. Dave Pickerel would be proud of you guys.
I appreciate you saying that. I was thinking the same thing, and obviously it's always nice to hear that. We couldn't have done this without Dave.
Let's talk about what you guys have done with this and why it's coming out specifically on Monday.
Yeah, so this is our straight rye bottled in bond, and Jay Rieger and Company is a distillery that was founded back in 1887 here in Kansas City, Missouri, right along the river. And it grew to become a huge national brand that was distributed coast to coast, and then went out of business with Prohibition in 1919. Fast forward 95 years, myself and the great-great-great-grandson of the founding Rieger, we resurrected the brand, brought it back, but we did it with a blended and rectified whiskey. So we sourced multiple whiskeys, blended them together. We add a small amount of Oloroso sherry to it, and that was our first product that we let out with, known as Kansas City whiskey as a style. But all along, we built the distillery and began distilling in the summer of 2015 with the intention of releasing our own. And that's what we have here. So finally, after 6 long years of waiting in barrel, we have our first batch ready to go, ready to release. And we decided to go ahead and make it a bottled in bond. And
it comes out on Monday, which is August 16th, 8/16 on the calendar. And that has a special significance, doesn't it?
Yeah, our area code here is 816 in Kansas City, Missouri. And so when we were trying to come up with a date, it was a few months ago, we knew the whiskey was ready to go. We were excited about it. We were trying to kind of, position it amongst some other exciting things that we have going on, and couldn't really land on a date. And then somebody threw out, why not just do it on August 16th on 816 Day to celebrate Kansas City? And that, nothing could be more perfect.
Our listeners occasionally come up with some fairly cheeky comments, and Nurse Dave is among the worst offenders with this one. They have to make a barbecue sauce barrel-finished whiskey soon. Any plans in the works for something like that?
Well, he's not too far off. I mean, we actually have collaborated with Joe's Kansas City Barbecue here to make an actual barbecue sauce using our Kansas City whiskey, and that's a product that's already available, and we started that a few years ago. As far as the barrel side of it, that could be a fun next step in the evolution of that product for sure.
I will tell you to be careful, having tried stuff in Tabasco finished barrels. You want to be really careful with that. And as Dave points out, see, Mark, yeah, okay, you got me on that one, Dave. But
I'm not going to rule anything out. I mean, we like to have a good time, and if it has to do with barbecue, I'm listening at least.
Let's talk about the Dave Pickerel connection, because he was sort of your guru at the start, wasn't he, before his passing a couple of years ago?
He really was. I mean, Dave was. So my background was in the bar and restaurant industry, and so I had a lot of experience with the spirits industry and everything. And I had met Dave years before we started this company. And once Andy Rieger and I got to the point where we were ready to do this, really the last thing that was holding us up was Andy said, well, how do we know we're going to be able to make whiskey in 4, 5, 6 years, whenever it's ready, it's going to be good? And I was like, well, I've never actually distilled myself before, but I do know Dave Pickerel, who was the former Master Distiller at Maker's Mark and then started Whistle Pig and so on and so forth. And Andy just kind of gave me this blank stare, and he's like, you know him? Well, yeah, I've got his number. I can call him up, see if he wants to help us out. So, we got Dave on the phone, and Dave was always down for a good time and a fun project. So, he never hesitated. He was all in from the beginning, and we made him a partner in the company. He wasn't just like a hired gun, but he was family.
And how have you guys coped since his passing?
Well, it's been really tough. It's been tough on all of us to lose Dave. We spent a lot of time with him, especially in the early startup years, building the distillery, designing the still. And then we hired a head distiller who had a chemistry background and had worked for Boulevard Brewing Company and understood fermentation and all that stuff, but he had never actually distilled. So he was mentored by Dave. Like, Dave really, oversaw everything that he was doing and taught him everything. And so it was really hard for Nathan, our head distiller, initially. And I think it still is. We all get a little bit emotional when something like this comes out, and it makes us think about Dave. So I think he'd be very proud. Like you said before, I think he'd be proud of Whiskey in the Bottle. I think he'd be proud of where we are today as a company, and we all really miss him.
Brian, let me bring you back into the conversation here, because you're just getting started distilling rye in Minnesota. And I'm just curious, what have you learned about having to distill rye? Because Dave used to refer to rye as the brat of grains because it's an absolute pain in the ass to distill.
Absolutely. I remember when we were distilling it in Middleton as well, and it was an absolute, I definitely would say, a pain in the arse to brew. Once you get through that brewing element of it, I actually think that once you get to the distillation, the flavor that comes off, the actual spiciness, the lovely clove, the rye bread type notes that are coming through in it are fantastic. So it's worth the pain in the arse of brewing it, to be honest with you. I'm excited about doing it here now as well, and doing it a little bit differently to what we would have done in Middleton, and also doing it a little bit differently in that we'll probably look at doing it through, well, we will look at doing it through our triple copper pot stills. So looking forward to seeing what that flavor will turn out to be like.
I just poured a glass of your bottled in Bond Rye, and I love the color on this. Just absolutely dark, rich, really a dark coppery color to this. And that comes from the 4 years in new barrels, right?
Well, this one's actually almost 6 years old now.
Okay.
We're like just a month shy of 6 years. And the other thing, actually, it's funny you mentioned the color, because Nathan and I were just talking about this the other day. Like, you're right, it does have a really dark amber copper hue, and it's beautiful. And so we use a char number 3 barrel. So it's not like a heavy char, it's just right in the middle. But the climate here in Kansas City is basically the same as in Kentucky. It gets really, really hot in the summer, and it gets just bone-numbing cold in the wintertime. And so I think that dramatic shift in climate really helps with the aging and the impact that the barrels have on the whiskey. And then the last thing I'll add to that, and this is a little bit more fun and nuanced and maybe kind of hypothetical, but we are right on the railroad tracks, like literally right outside the window here are the railroad tracks running by the building, and the tracks are very the trains are very frequent, about every 20 or 30 minutes, and the building vibrates. And if I were sitting here at this table and the train comes by, you'd see the liquid in my glass vibrating, and so you know that's happening in the barrels, right? So it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to think that constant vibration every 20 or 30 minutes, 365 days a year for 6 years is going to have an impact. So I'll just throw that out there and let you chew on it.
Well, I need to warn you, though, you're talking about bone-chilling cold in Kansas City. Brian's living in Minneapolis.
All right.
I got you beat on the cold thing.
So there is a massive benefit to it, so from a maturation point of view.
Absolutely.
Because it sucks the whiskey back out of the barrel, out of the wood, and into the barrel itself, into the contents, and then it can expand back out when it gets warmer, right?
Yeah, and for me, coming from Ireland, where the majority of barrels that are used for maturation are refill barrels, you don't get that immediate color contribution. You don't get that fantastic color contribution that you see on your whiskey there. So I'm really excited to see that as well, because if you're getting that massive color contribution, you're also getting that fantastic wood contribution as well that should balance with the whiskey distillates that we produce. And that's one of the things that at our distillery here, when we start doing a malted barley and unmalted barley mash bill, we will most likely actually come off the stills lower in proof than I would have been used to in Middleton, to try and bring more of that robust flavour forward in order to compete with the virgin American oak barrels, in order to give us both a balance of distillate and wood, rather than just losing some of the distillate characteristic to the wood.
You both have essentially, in your case, Brian, more of a startup than Ryan's, because Ryan's has been around for a few years now, but you both got to build your distilleries from the ground up. So I'm just curious how you designed the distillery to shape the spirit.
For me, what I wanted to make sure with the distillery that we were putting together here was that there was a lot of flexibility and versatility within the distillery that allowed us to be able to to play around with different mash bill types, different cereal types. And then when it came to the distillation process, to be able to do your triple distillation on your copper pot stills, to do double distillation if we wanted to. But it was all about flexibility. And that's something that I suppose I carried with me from Middleton as well, is that distillery has such flexibility and versatility. I think it's a great benefit to have in any business, that you have the ability to be as innovative as you possibly can within the guidelines that you're dealing with, like we'll say for the TTB. But so versatility was key in the design for us. And, I think we've achieved that within in this distillery. We're actually starting commissioning next week. So then the fun will really begin, and we'll see how versatile and how well the design has been when we start getting distillate off the pots and the columns. So maybe in a couple of weeks you can come back to me, Mark, and see how we're going and if I still have a job.
I think it's too late now for that. You've already got the family in Minnesota.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
We have a comment here from Christopher Malloy. I just picked up Pierre's 5-year-old Irish single malt at 46% for $30. Has anyone heard of or tried it? Yes, I have, and you got a good deal at $30 a bottle. Ryan, let's go on to you on your thoughts, how you guys designed your distillery.
Well, I think the point about versatility is really important. I would agree with that, and we did that as well. And more specifically, versatility for growth, because when we first started, as a startup, we were somewhat limited by our financial resources and all those things, and not really knowing, how much whiskey we would be able to sell. That's a difficult thing to balance. Like, how much do you produce now, not knowing what your business is going to be like in 5 or 6 years. So we were relatively modest in the size and scope of our setup back in 2014. But since then, we've actually bought the building next door, moved the production over to that, and then added another still. So now we have about a 25-foot tall column still. We have the original 750-gallon pot still that we used to make this. And we have also added now another 500-gallon copper pot still just dedicated to gin. And so we kind of differentiate things, the production setup based on the product that we're making, because we also make a really good gin, one to have a still dedicated to that. But now at this point, with the column added in, I think we have a ton of room to grow that will allow us to continue to grow our business over the next several decades without needing more space.
That's true.
I'm just going to go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry, it was just to add to that point. It is a bit of crystal ball gazing when you're looking at starting a new brand and what your sales are going to be, and you do start out with as best a forecast as you possibly can, but it's only when you start launching on market that you actually see where your growth is and how quickly it's going to grow. So definitely right, Ryan, in having the ability to expand and and if you're buying in stock as well, that you have inventory at hand so that you don't run out of stock, particularly for something like the Keeper's Heart blend there at the moment now.
And it's interesting to just sort of watch. I have to admit I'm somewhat distracted right now because I have 2 kittens, Char and Stave, that are running around on the floor here, and I'm just hoping that they don't pull a cable out because I've got everything off the floor as best I can, but there's no guarantees that one of those little stink pots is not going to pull a cable out at some point here during this show. So
those are great names, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, Char is all black and Stave has stripes, and if I could catch them, hang on a second here. This is Stave, and he's got the stripes like the staves on a barrel.
Yeah.
And come here, Goober. Nope, he's on the other side. I can't get to him. But Char is all black like the char on the inside of a barrel. And yes, Friday the 13th, and I've got a black cat to boot. So, yeah, we're just taking all kinds of chances here today. Let's see. Spirit Bomb is off to a gin show in Brighton tomorrow. Okay, it's England, Tabitha. We'll let you off the hook for that one. And David Owen says, have fun. By the way, we will take your comments, of course, in the chat areas on Twitter, YouTube. On YouTube and Facebook. If you're watching us on Twitter or Twitch, we will not see them until afterwards. There was a question here I wanted to get back to. Bill Ricker up in Boston, Massachusetts, was passing through New Hampshire yesterday. The state store there had a Tasmanian whiskey on clearance, and not the one he'd heard of, Hellier's Road. Sure, he'll try most anything on clearance. Bill, I want to know what you got, because I've had a lot of good Tasmanian whiskeys, and I'm just curious, if it wasn't Hellier's Road, which one it was, because we like Hellier's Road and we like Tasmania around here. Watch Mad 99 in Canada. Let the fun begin. Be gin. And Crump the Cask Hole. What's gin? So, Brian, tell me how you cope with not having whiskey to work with of your own for at least 2 or 3 more years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, having been able to actually source good quality whiskey was an important part of this exercise, to make sure that we had the ability to release a whiskey immediately out of the gate and showcase the art of blending, really. And I feel that with the pot still and grain whiskey that we purchased in Ireland and the rye whiskey that we purchased here, I think we've done very well and been able to really showcase those flavors and that art of blending. In relation to having our own whiskey, I'm hoping that within about 2 to 2.5 years, particularly using the virgin American oak barrels, that we might be able to release our first American single pot still at that stage. And using the malted barley and unmalted barley mash bill. But again, it will all depend on quality. If the quality isn't right at that stage, we'll hold it longer. So that's the way, and that's the vision that we have, is we're not just going to put it out there for the sake of putting it out there. The quality has to be right and the flavour has to be right before we do it. But I'm confident enough by maybe 2.5 years that it should be okay.
I am just hearing our Irish whiskey loving friends just cringing right now at the thought of American single pot still whiskey. I know that there have been a couple. Talnua out in Colorado has done a pretty good one, but really, Brian, American single pot still?
Sure, why not? Why not?
Okay. And we should explain exactly what single pot still is for those who are not aware. It's a pot still, obviously, but it's a mix of malted and unmalted barley, right?
Exactly, yeah. So it's a mash bill of malted and unmalted barley, and it's distilled 3 times in copper pot stills. Obviously, it's the whiskey that is synonymous with Ireland, and that would have been the quintessential way that Irish whiskey years gone by. And for us, is that the train, Ryan?
Yes, sir. Here it is.
So let's watch the level in that bottle and see if it involves some shaking here.
And effectively, then it's distilled 3 times in copper pot stills and before it refilled in American barrels. So our vision here is to Americanize Irish whiskey and to Irishize American whiskey. And basically, we're going to take the traditional Irish pot still style and mature it in virgin American oak barrels. And as I said, probably take it off a little bit lower in strength in order for the pot still characteristic to be able to compete with the virgin American oak. And then on the American side, we're going to actually distill rye and bourbon in the copper pot stills and do triple distillation, and then mature in virgin American oak, but we'll also do some in refill barrels. And obviously then you can't call them a bourbon or a rye, you'll call them distilled from a bourbon mash or a rye mash. But we really feel that we've got a lot of flexibility and a lot of innovation there, and taste profiles that I think will be relatively new to market and will interest consumers. One of the things that we're not going to be, and something that, being a distiller, when you've got lots of new toys to play with, is you could become like a bit of a nutty professor and start producing all of these weird and wonderful distillates, but nobody will get to taste them or nobody will like them. So we want to make sure that it's consumer-centric as well and consumer-focused, to make sure that, we're doing something that is going to bring new taste profiles that people want to the market as well.
And I should note, we muted Ryan just for a couple of seconds here because of the train, so it wasn't interfering, because we are releasing audio podcast versions of this, so we didn't want to have that in the background. Brian, I have to ask you, because I got to go back to your Irish roots for a second here. When we're talking about traditional stuff, your colleagues at Jameson released a new whiskey this week, Jameson Orange flavored whiskey. Any thoughts on this one? We had a comment from, Tabitha Spirit Bomb in the UK. Most Irish whiskey drinkers seem to be cringing over orange flavored Jameson. Me, I really want to try it.
Well, what I always say is innovation and experimentation is great. And obviously there's been a lot of effort put into that release, and I'm sure people will taste it and enjoy it. Innovation, any brand needs to grow, right? And the way any brand needs to grow is through innovation. And it's through innovation as well that will make you successful and will get more consumers involved in drinking your drinks. And that's why we at Keeper's Heart are really committed to doing innovation as well, So hopefully it works out. I think it'll be a nice whiskey for them.
And as Christopher Malloy points out, Compass Box has that orangery stuff, which is whiskey mixed, I believe, with orange essence or orange peel or orange liqueur, I believe. I'm spacing on that just to extend here. We've brought Ryan back in now. Has the train left, Ryan?
Yeah, sorry, you beat me to the mute. I was going to do it, but you beat me. You were a little bit quicker on the draw.
Perfectly all right. So what are you guys working on these days, and how have you guys had to cope with COVID and keeping your folks safe?
So COVID caused us to have to make a massive shift with the business where we immediately, and I mean immediately, pivoted to large-scale hand sanitizer production, and we produced over 100,000 gallons of hand sanitizer in a very short time period last March through May, essentially. And that kind of saved our company. Since then, it's been a series of one pivot after another, it seems. It's been kind of head spinning, having to constantly have so much uncertainty and need to figure out, okay, well, what's next? How do we, cope with this? But I think we're doing really, really well. I feel good about it. The fact that we got through it as well as we did, and we, didn't have to lay off our whole company. We kept almost all of our employees, and now we're adding more back. It gives me a lot of confidence in our ability, to handle adversity like that. And as far as what we're working on right now, I kind of tend to agree that you don't want to do too many different things. It's easy for me and it's easy for our head distiller to get really excited and creative about, hey, what if we try this or if we try that? But, at some point, if you just keep coming out with new products over and over, I can't help but wonder if it dilutes your brand and kind of waters down your identity and who you are. We want to make sure that every single product that we do is the best that it possibly can be. And we already make a couple different whiskeys and a vodka and a gin. So at some point we don't want to stretch ourselves so thin that we're, you ask yourself, well, who is Jay Rieger and Company?
And besides, Dave Pickerel would be throwing down lightning bolts from heaven if you got too far out of line, right?
Oh, absolutely. No. We definitely want to, not piss him off for sure.
I kid, of course. Brian, I have to ask the question here. What did your colleagues at Middleton say when you said, I'm leaving, I'm going to Minnesota to a startup?
Your what?
What did Dave Quinn and Billy and the boys say?
They were shocked, to be honest with you, like lots of people would have been. But very supportive as well when they understood, that this was something that, I felt I wanted to do. I felt that I wanted to change. I felt that I wanted to do something different. Even Barry Crockett himself, I rang Barry to tell him I was moving on, and he was shocked as well. But again, they were all extremely supportive, and that was what was very important for me because, I was very proud of my time at Midleton. I have very good friends at Middleton, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure was that I left on good terms, and that it was, that they were wishing me well in my new adventure, and they have been, and I'm still in contact with them all: Kevin, Dave, Billy, Tommy, Barry, all of them I'm still in contact with, and it's great. And they're all going to come at some different points to visit the distillery, and I look forward to hosting them here.
And Dagmara, of course, right?
Dagmara, yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't have forgotten Dagmara. Definitely.
You can't forget Dagmara Dubrovska, the chief scientist and the laboratory guru that really makes the whiskey there what it is.
She's an amazing person, to be fair.
How do you replicate all that experience at Middleton in a startup distillery, though?
Yeah, it's obviously not easy. One of the things that is very important in our distillery here is to make sure that we develop each individual to the best of their ability and to the best of their competency in relation to the business. We have some fine distillers after coming on board. We have a guy called Chris Silver who worked a number of years ago in Old Elk and was in Indeed Brewing in Minneapolis for the last few years. And we also have a fantastic distiller called Kate who joined us from Old Elk only about 2 or 3 months ago. And they've got great experience, and they've got great experience in American whiskey, which is fantastic from my point of view as well. And, every day, as far as I'm concerned, every day I step foot in here, every day is a school day. We all learn from each other, and we all will grow with each other. And then, of course, we also have David Perkins, who has come on board with us as a liquid collaborator. And that's something that I'm very excited about because I would have been good friends with David for the last probably 10, 15 years. And we knew each other through whiskey, and we became friends. And I was a real fan of all of his whiskies and his innovative styles within High West. So to get the opportunity to work with David on this adventure is really exciting for me. And when I had a conversation, David was surprised when I came on board, and I think that's sparked his interest in coming on board with us as well. So we had a conversation, and I loved what David said. He just said, I've unfinished business in whiskey, and I'd like to work with you. And I just thought, yeah, absolutely. I would be really proud and honored to have David working alongside us. So he's with us, and it's great. It's fantastic.
I have to ask, Brian, what did your family say when you presented them with the opportunity to move to Minnesota?
It's very interesting, Mark. My wife took a little bit of persuading at the start, and then she met the O'Shaughnessy's. And when she met the O'Shaughnessy's, particularly Michael O'Shaughnessy's father, Jerry, she was sold on the job straight away. She was happy with the move. We myself and my wife then visited in January 2020 and took a look at schools and took a look at the places to see whether this was a place we would be happy to move to. And that all went well. And then we came back to tell our kids. And I have a 14-year-old girl and a 12-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. So we didn't tell Brian first. We told the two girls. And the first thing they said when they heard it was Minneapolis, they said, Great Mall of America. That's in Minneapolis. Oh, my God, we're there. And I thought it was kind of, no way, we're not moving or anything like that. But they have been brilliant. They have been very excited about it. And my 7-year-old boy has been extremely excited about it as well. And they're here now, and they've got to see the schools they're going to. And they're excited. Look, I'm under no illusions. There's going to be days where they're going to come home missing their friends, missing their grandparents. We all miss people back in Ireland. But, we'll go home at Christmas, we'll go home at summer, and we have a fantastic opportunity to tour around America and get to see places that we would have never probably had the opportunity to do when we were living in Cork. So all in all, it's a fantastic adventure for the whole family, and we're really, really excited about it and really thrilled we're here now.
You're going to have to teach the kids to play hockey instead of hurling now, right?
Absolutely, but would you believe there's actually the Irish Fair is in Minneapolis tomorrow. It's in St. Paul tomorrow, and they're actually doing hurling and camogie training. So my kids are going to go out there and try and show them how they play hurling as well. So that'll be good. And they're planning to join all the different sports. So it is great fun now at the moment.
So they do know how to ice skate, right?
I don't. They know. They're quite good at it, but I certainly don't know how to ice skate. I don't think it would be safe to let me anywhere near an ice rink.
You can learn. You can learn to play in a beer league up there. You can play beer league hockey.
Maybe so. Who knows?
Ryan, tell us what else is going on at your distillery, because you've reopened to the public now, right?
Yeah, we have. We've reopened to the public, and we still have a mask mandate here in Kansas City, Missouri, and for the most part, people are abiding by that and being pretty cool about it. But business is definitely heading back in the right direction. I mean, it's starting to feel almost normal again. To some extent. We're also expanding the on-site business here. We're building an outdoor seating space, an outdoor bar, and entertainment area, again, right by the railroad tracks, because why not? And so we're just trying to, add more versatility to our on-site business here, because, I mean, we built this building 6 months before COVID. We opened this. And prior to that, we didn't have any on-site business. We didn't have any bars or tasting rooms or tours. And now it's like a huge amount. So it's a big part of our business, and we need to make sure that we have the opportunity to get through situations like this. So we're building the outdoor patio, and we're just excited about the future, man. Like we're ramping up our production. This straight rye bottled and bond is a relatively small production, but we're gonna have a lot more in the coming years, and we'll also be releasing a sister product to this, a straight bourbon bottled and bond, perhaps next year.
Brian, tell us what visitor opportunities there are in Minneapolis at O'Shaughnessy's.
Yeah, well, as of next Thursday, we'll be opening our doors to the public, and that will allow people to come on tours of the distillery, do tastings, and also just come to the bar and have a drink, have some cocktails, and some food. So it's a fantastic offering here. We have three guys. Pip Hansen, Maddie, and Tyler are some fantastic guys that are putting together our cocktails with Keeper's Heart, and they've really done a great job. So there's some fantastic drinks that can be had at the distillery, as well as some fantastic food. We have a fantastic group of chefs at the distillery as well, led by Chef Vince Riccardelli, and he's just an amazing chef. So there's lots for people to come and see and enjoy. One of the things that we've put a lot of effort into, as well as education around the distillery. So we put a lot of effort into our education boards that will allow people get as much understanding of the whiskey making process and what sets us apart from others as they want to. So we can go as top level or as detailed as we want to within the tours themselves, and people get the opportunities to do some blending exercises as well. So it'll be good fun. Most important thing what we want people to do when they come here is to enjoy themselves and have good quality drinks with friends and family, and that's the most important thing for us. That's what we want to see people leaving here with a smile on their face.
Now, I'm just curious. You both have talked about expanding past these initial offerings from your own distillery. And how do you decide what you're going to offer next? Ryan, you talked about offering a bottled and bond bourbon at some point next year. How do you decide when to pull the trigger and actually say, okay, we're going to do it?
Well, we know that we're going to do it. The question really is when, because we've already made it. We started. We basically, when we started distilling in the very beginning, we went on campaigns where we buy bulk corn and rye and barley for the bourbon, and make nothing but bourbon every day for like 2 months, 3 months, and then we transitioned to making our rye, which is 96% rye and 4% malted barley, by the way. And so, we would basically kind of toggle back and forth between making those two different products. And so we're going to have the bourbon ready to go. It's just a matter of deciding when it's ready. And as far as that goes, it's tasting it and not trying to rush that process, and making sure that we're patient enough and we're making that decision based on the quality of the juice, and not just because we need to get it out there on shelves. So that's kind of how we make that decision. And as far as anything else goes, as long as it's an idea of a product that fits within our brand identity, kind of like what I talked about earlier, and it doesn't distract us too much from what we already have going on, which is a lot, then we would take it into consideration and perhaps add something else to the lineup.
Brian, what do you expect to be the next release from Keeper's Heart? Will it be something with a finish? Will it be a barrel strength? What are you expecting? Because I'm tasting this and nosing it, and I love the aromas on this, and I'm just curious what you can do with it to make it even better.
So we've given ourselves, we've set out a roadmap between, we'll say, whiskey that we purchase and then whiskey that we make ourselves. So we've set ourselves a roadmap for the next number of years. Our next release is going to be a finished 10-year-old single malt whiskey. The finish, I won't tell you what it is at the moment because we're going to release it in a couple of months. So that will be our next release. We also will be looking at doing a single pot still Irish whiskey over the next period of time. And then we'll be getting into our own releases from whiskey that we distilled ourselves. We also are looking at other barrel finishing programs that we want to, we look at in relation to the Keeper's Heart blend itself or the Keeper's Heart whiskey itself. And so we have a number of different ideas of what the next few releases will be, but the next release will be a 10-year-old single malt with a finish on it.
Where did the Keeper's Heart name come from?
Keeper's Heart name, actually, there was a lot of time and effort went into that. It was one of the most enjoyable meetings that we have every week because, you've got lots of people with lots of ideas, lots of good ideas. And when you're naming a brand and when you're naming something like this, you want it to have meaning and go back to the whole idea behind why this whole distillery was set up in the first place. And if you go back to why the distillery was set up, it was all about, cousins Michael and Patrick O'Shaughnessy really looking at a way of bringing their family together on a regular basis and having this whole reason for being and reason to actually be together. Keeper's Heart came out of that philosophy of bringing people together to enjoy good whiskey. So if you look at Keepers, you talk about keepers of quality, keepers of tradition, keepers of people that are actually going to grow our brand and are very important in our brand are barkeepers. So that was where the word keepers came from. Then you've got the keep, which goes back to an old traditional Irish way, which is the keep was in a castle where you would store your most prized possessions. And if you look on our label, we have 2 keys. And these keys are actually giving you the keys to the keep because we feel that anybody that comes to our distillery or wants to know more about our distillery, they become part of the Keeper's Heart family. So we're offering up keys to the keep so they can taste our whiskies, taste all of our finest product and enjoy themselves when they come here. And then heart is down to the heart of the distillate, the heart and the quality, and the heart of the people behind it, because I have to say that family values are a very, very strong part of this team. And when we were putting this team together and to become part of it, it really was like-minded people with very strong values around family and coming together. That really was the strength behind putting this together. And then finally, you see the words Fugit Hora. And that means the hour flies. And that's that would have been a motto on the O'Shaughnessy coat of arms, the O'Shaughnessy family coat of arms. And that really is very prevalent in today when you think of what's gone on over the last 2 years. Enjoy every moment together when you have it, and to really enjoy time with friends, with family, and definitely drinking a nice Keeper's Heart whiskey on the rocks. So that's where it came from. So there was a lot of time and effort put into getting the brand right.
Ryan, give us a basic history of Jay Rieger, because while the distillery that you have in Kansas City is only a few years old, the history really goes back more than a century, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I love that description, Brian. That was awesome. I would have loved to have gone through that process of trying to, come up with a brand name and everything, but we didn't have to. I mean, it was right there in front of us. I mean, Jay Rieger and Company was founded by Jacob Rieger in 1887, and it grew to become a huge brand. After Prohibition, they went out of business in 1920 with Prohibition, and 2 years later, the trademark expired. And when I discovered the history of the brand back in 2010, excuse me, I was immediately so excited about the opportunity of bringing it back. One of the first things that I did was I reached out to find out about the trademark. And this shield here, this is the original shield. We didn't have to mess with it at all. It expired in 1922, signed by Alexander Rieger. It was Jacob's son. And so it was right there. I mean, we didn't even nobody owned it. We just, were able to acquire it. And so a lot of also what goes into our bottle and our label, we're taking cues from that old brand. We're trying to pay tribute to it and be true to that heritage. So even the font, and some of the design elements, and my favorite part is this slogan that's on every bottle. If you look on back, this banner says, "Oh, so good." That was their marketing motto throughout everything. We have a ton of printed materials, advertisements, sell sheets, things like that, banners from back then. And they all say, "Oh, so good." And so we incorporate that into every bottle. And so it's just been a really awesome opportunity to be able to resurrect this brand and bring it back from the dead and breathe some new life into it.
But I want to point out that unlike other entrepreneurs that have resurrected historic whiskey brands, you're actually working with Andy Rieger, a descendant of Jacob Rieger, right?
That is correct. He is the great-great-great-grandson of Jacob Rieger, and he was the only living descendant of Jacob Rieger when I met him. And so the way that happened was I opened up a restaurant in this old hotel building in downtown Kansas City. This was back in 2010, and it was owned by the Rieger family. It was originally called the Rieger Hotel, and so I opened up a restaurant, and I'm looking at the comments here. And I called it.
Don't look at those; it just encourages them.
And I called it the Rieger. I named the restaurant the Rieger, and I, kind of built in the whiskey brand into the branding and elements of the restaurant. And that's how Andy found out about it. He was actually living in Dallas, Texas, and heard about what I was doing. And he came up here and came into the restaurant and he introduced himself, and I was just floored. I mean, we had never even met. And he had no idea that I was going to try and bring back his whiskey until I said, "Hey, I really think we should bring back your family's whiskey company. I think we should be partners," which, kind of came out of left field. But now here we are.
And it's all been downhill ever since.
Downhill ever since, man.
What's your tell us about the party on Monday night, because you're actually having the 8/16 release party, right?
Yeah, we're having a small gathering here at the distillery to celebrate the release of this rye on 8/16 day. And, we're just going to have fun with it. We want people to, I think it's something worth celebrating, not just 8/16 day, but the fact that this is the first whiskey that was distilled in Kansas City in, about 100 years. So, I think that's something worth celebrating.
And Kansas City actually, for a lot of folks who don't know this, had a pretty good whiskey reputation before Prohibition. It was a good whiskey city in terms of distilleries because of all the corn being grown around Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, that whole area.
Yeah, it turns out there were quite a few. There were quite a few distilleries and brands in the area, and also Kansas City was the main connection point if you're headed out west. And back in that time period, the late 1800s, early 1900s, everybody was traveling west. And Union Station, our train station here, was the second largest train station in the country behind Grand Central. So everybody had to pass through here, and it's also how our brand got spread nationwide. We got a huge collection of old bottles from that time period, old advertisements and pictures and all that stuff. And a lot of it we found around the country, mostly out west, like Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California. So it was a very widespread brand.
Brian, we have a question for you from John Madden. He wants to know if we're going to see Keeper's Heart whiskey for sale in Ireland.
Absolutely, Mark. That's our vision. But we're also going to release it state by state over the next number of months, and the plan would be to have it nationwide probably within 12 months, and then look at potentially bringing it to Ireland and Europe. That's something that I certainly would would love, and that's the vision that we have as a business. But you've got to walk before you can run, and that's the philosophy that we're taking at the moment. So, John, we'll definitely get you a bottle.
Question for both of you from Whiskey Canuck up in the Ottawa area. When opening a distillery where there isn't already a distilling industry, what challenges did you face as a result in terms of no local suppliers for equipment, issues with zoning and permits and things like that? What kind of challenges did you both face in building your distilleries? And let's start with Ryan.
So we're in the state of Missouri, and Missouri historically, if you're familiar with the liquor business nationally, is one of the easiest states to operate in and sell booze in the country. The laws are pretty relaxed. However, being the first distillery in Kansas City since Prohibition did present some hurdles because city ordinances, there was just nothing written. There really wasn't anything for distillation. And so we had to kind of, work really closely with the city to make sure that we were doing everything correctly. As far as like all the other stuff, the equipment and all that, I mean, we're so close to Kentucky, and that's where Vendome is located. That's where we got our stills, built from scratch and custom design and everything. And so also don't forget that, in South Missouri and Lebanon is the largest cooperage in the world, independent stave, and that's where we get all of our barrels from. So there were some actual geographic advantages that we had to being located right here in the middle of the country.
Brian?
I think for us, there was a lot of learning around permitting and the different legislation and different laws in Minnesota for producing whiskey and for having a visitor center and all of that. So that proved challenging, and just making sure that you understood what the rules were. But when you work close with the city and when you work close with the authorities, I think you're able to overcome all of that. As regards equipment, then we sourced our pot stills for sites in Scotland. So that's where we would feel would be they're world renowned for good pot still manufacturing. So we sourced our pot stills from there, and we sourced our columns from Vendome, and our brewing equipment and fermenters from Pickerel. So we just go to good suppliers from that point of view and renowned suppliers. So geographic location at that stage doesn't really matter when you're just looking for the equipment that suits your process most.
Question from the Silver Lock Whiskey Club. Isn't Boot Hill Distillery in Kansas City or nearby, perhaps? I do believe it is. It's been a while since I've tasted their stuff, but yeah, Boot Hill, I believe, is out in Kansas City, and there are some other distilleries around Kansas City and Minneapolis as well.
So Kansas City, I mean, Boot Hill, I've been to Boot Hill. It's probably about 5 hours southwest of here, roughly by car, 5-6 hours. It's in a kind of the southwestern part of the state of Kansas. As far as like other distilleries around here, since we started in 2014, there have been some more that have opened in the Kansas City, like in the city, like where we are. And there have been a few that are kind of on the outskirts of the city, like Lenexa, Kansas. There's a really good distillery called Union Horse. There's a really cool one up in Parkville in a cave called SD Strong. So now, actually, the state of Missouri has, I think, around 70 DSPs. So it's quite a lot.
Are you going to take advantage of the Missouri bourbon law that passed about 2 years ago?
I think the law that passed is great for the state and for the industry. The only thing that is a little bit of a challenge for us is that it's kind of geared towards really small production, because all of the corn that you use has to come from the state of Missouri. And we do buy corn in larger bulk batches that come from the surrounding states, like mostly Iowa and Nebraska and around there. So in order to be able to label it Missouri straight bourbon, we'd have to change our process a little bit. But I wouldn't rule out anything, down the line.
And Brian, I only ask these questions because we know that when folks travel to a city, they want to hit several distilleries. I know Du Nord Spirits is in Minneapolis, but what else is around you, or have you had a chance to figure out yet?
I'm just getting my bearings around that, but there's Tattersall, I would say, would be there. And I'm not sure of other ones, to be honest, because when I get here, I focus on this distillery, and basically that's where my time is focused on at the moment. But I'm sure there are a few others around the place that I'm going to get to see and learn about over the next number of months. and look forward to doing so, you know.
And I ask these only because we see so many of these distillery trails popping up around various cities and various states. And I know that in Missouri, there are enough distilleries that you could have a Missouri distillery trail at some point in Minneapolis.
We actually already do. We already have one. We have a Missouri Craft Distillers Guild, which is an organization that I'm on the board of. And one of the main things that we do is we organize what we call the Missouri Spirits Expedition. And it is a trail around Missouri to visit roughly 30 to 33 different distilleries throughout the state.
And I think for us in Minneapolis, that's a kind of ambition of ours as well, is that, you know, we be involved in starting up a whiskey trail or a whiskey place where people can visit different distilleries and learn the different intricacies of what the different distilleries are doing and producing. So yeah, I mean, it's something that we hope that we will be at the forefront of driving forward here in Minneapolis.
And I say that because, Brian, I remember what your colleagues at Irish Distillers have always said, that a rising tide lifts all boats.
100%, Mark, yeah, 100%. And I think
the more distilleries there are, the better for everybody.
It is, and you know something, I think it's also a great opportunity for, you know, new distilleries opening up to kind of talk to each other, to learn from each other, and, you know, that's something that I'm very strong advocate of and have been all through my career in Irish Distillers, and would like to continue that forward here in Minneapolis as well.
Well, guys, that's it for tonight. We have killed more time than you will ever be able to get back. And I want to thank our guests, Brian Nation, our old pal from formerly from Middleton Distillery, and it's going to take me a while to get used to this, Brian. Now with O'Shaughnessy Distilling in Minneapolis in Keeper's Heart Whiskey, and I promise I will get to Minneapolis soon, and I will get to Kansas City, Ryan, to see you guys at Jay Rieger and Company, Ryan Maybee. Thank you guys for doing this, and the initial releases of Keeper's Heart and the Jay Rieger Bottle and Bond, I'll have my tasting notes for them on the podcast this weekend. Spoiler alert, I like them both. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Mark, lovely to meet you, Ryan. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Once again, that's our Happy Hour Live webcast from last Friday night, August 13th, with Ryan Maybee of Jay Rieger and Company and Ryan Nation from O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company in Minneapolis. Join us each Friday night for our live webcasts on the WhiskeyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. We start right at 5 p.m. New York time, and you can join in the conversation with our guests and viewers from all over the world. Thanks again to the presenting sponsors of WhiskeyCast, Dewar's and Redbreast, along with our segment sponsors on the podcast each week, Sagamore Spirit, Writer's Tears, and Open. WhiskeyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.